This is the 2025 Bajaj Pulsar NS400Z. I know it looks exactly the same as the previous iteration, even in terms of colorways, but if you look deeper, there are a raft of changes which Bajaj have made, which I'm really happy about. So, first and foremost, let's start with the engine. The engine now is souped up. It now makes 43 PS instead of 40 PS on the previous iteration. Then you have the most important part, which is the upgrade to the sintered brake pads, which this motorcycle needed very desperately, which we had spoken about in the previous video. And yes, Bajaj have gone ahead and done it. And not just that, to put all that stopping power down, they have also upgraded the tires. So now we are running Alpha H1 radial tires at the front and the back, which are definitely a whole lot stickier than the tires on the previous iteration. And at the back again, you have the slightly wider 150 section tire, which should help this motorcycle be a little more stable, considering that you're running a wheelbase which is almost 20 mm shorter than the wheelbase on the NS200. And last but not least, you also get a bidirectional quick shifter. This is the first Pulsar ever to get that. And yeah, it just makes the Pulsar that much more tempting a proposition. That's the motorcycle with all the changes that we had asked for in the previous model. And at least on paper, it looks really promising. But does that translate to on the road? Let's go and find out. I knew for a while, like so many of you, about the changes which were expected on the NS400Z in terms of the change to the sintered pads, the wider section tires, radial tires at the front and the back. But what I did not see coming was the change to the engine, which is a welcome surprise. Now the engine, as you know, makes 43 PS instead of 40 PS compared to the previous iteration, with the changes they made to the intake duct after the switch to the forged piston. And in terms of how it feels, to be honest, I will have to write this back to back with the older iteration to tell you the step that Bajaj have made with the extra 3 PS. Right now in isolation it's hard to tell, but what I can tell you is, as we fire out of this exit, yeah, it's a lot stronger in the higher revs now, because even the rev ceiling has gone up by about 1000 RPM to help Bajaj eke out all the 43 PS of power at a higher 10,600 RPM, I think. So it does pack a lot of punch higher up. Lower down, it's quite similar to the older bike. There's not much happening below 5,000 RPM. But after it gets going, around 7,000 RPM is where, yeah, it really comes alive. Also quite happy with the refinement of the engine, even with the increase in power and the punchiness of the engine. The handlebar and the foot pegs remain pretty much buzz free, just the right amount of buzz to keep you engaged, but it never really gets in your way. And one of the reasons why you'll appreciate this increase in speed even more, the fact that you will actually be able to enjoy it, is of course with the changes they have made to the brakes, which allow you to do this. Such a big difference the sintered pads and the switch to stickier tires have made. So the Apollo H1s, I'll have to admit, at least in the wet, they don't inspire us the same amount of confidence as the Pro Torque Extreme do, especially when you're leaning the bike in a corner, because they lack a little bit of the feedback that the Pro Torques had. But otherwise, overall, they're still a huge step forward compared to the original tires, which I hated on the previous iteration. And yeah, you even in these dreadful conditions, you feel so much more confident, carrying a lot more speed, because you know you can brake when you want to. And yeah, there's also very little movement even when you're putting the power down, even on these wet roads. And of course, the last part is the bidirectional quick shifter. This is the first Pulsar ever to get a bidirectional quick shifter. And what's unique about this quick shifter is like it doesn't have that additional sensor like on the system which you have on the KTM, where you have a separate sensor, either pressure or angle sensor, to ensure that your shifts are accurate. Now, Bajaj have worked closely with Bosch to introduce this, and it's barely just working with the gear shift sensor and sending signals to the ECU whenever the sensor feels that the rider wants to make a change. So it's supposed to be not the most accurate systems, but I have to say I'm actually quite impressed with it. Even without an actual sensor at the gear level, I think it's working quite well. The blipper is definitely a lot smoother than the quickshifter. The quickshifter does take a little more effort to slot in place, but yeah, it works really well, really smooth, especially in the higher revs. And yeah, you don't even have to ride at a certain RPM, or you have to be at full throttle for the quickshifter to work. In fact, even the blipper works when the throttle is on. You can go down the gears with the throttle still open, which kind of makes it surprisingly smooth. Which brings me to the only gripe with the system is the fact that you can only use it in the sport mode. And that's a bummer, because if you have the system already on the motorcycle, why wouldn't you use it in the road mode or the other modes? Because the road mode is in fact what I really preferred when I was riding around in the city, because I felt it was a lot calmer and it was also a lot more tractable compared to the throttle response in the sport mode, which felt a little choppy, especially when you're riding around in traffic. So I would have loved to have the bidirectional quickshifter also working in the road mode, so because that leaves me with one less thing to do, which is use the clutch for up and down shifts, and I would be using the gearbox quite a bit, especially when I'm riding around the city in traffic. So I really hope Bajaj look into it and also introduce it in the other modes, because I'm pretty sure it's just a software update. So keeping my fingers crossed.
Pulsar brand has always been synonymous with bringing insane value to the table, but more often than not, Bajaj goes a little too extreme. They skip out on some of the vital ingredients that would help complete the motorcycle. And that was very much the case with the previous iteration of the NS400Z. Packed an insane amount of potential, but lacked some of the vital things, which is exactly what they've tried to fix with the 2025 iteration. And all of these changes for an increase of just 8,000 rupees again mean that the NS400Z brings insane value to the table. And I think more importantly, for the first time ever, it's the most complete package that a Pulsar motorcycle has ever been. Don't get me wrong, this is still not perfect. The suspension I still feel needs some work, especially the rear shock can do with a little more rebound damping to settle the motorcycle, especially when you're pushing hard in corners. And lastly, I still would have preferred a little longer of a wheelbase to ensure the Pulsar stays stable, especially when you're riding at higher speeds, and when you encounter a bump, it doesn't unsettle the bike as much as it does right now. But keeping that aside, I still think this is perhaps the most complete package that Bajaj have ever produced, and if you ever wanted to consider Pulsar, this would be it.